Welcome to Battle Cry, where the blood, grit, and sacrifice of American warriors echo through the fiercest battles in American military history. From the first musket fired at Lexington to the firefights of Fallujah, we relive the turning points that shaped our freedom and incite patriotism. Stand tall, stand proud. The story begins now.
Okay, so that famous phrase, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes." Everyone connects that with the Battle of Bunker Hill, right?
Yeah.
It's like etched in stone.
It really is. It's one of those iconic lines. But what if that line, and maybe a lot of what you think you know about Bunker Hill, what if it's more legend than actual fact?
Ah, intriguing. So welcome everyone to the deep dive. We're not just, retelling the story here.
No, we're trying to peel back the layers, get past the myths, and find the gritty details and maybe some surprising truths that are buried in the original source material.
Yeah, our goal today is really to dig into sources like historical accounts, letters, British reports, eyewitness stuff.
And pull out the key bits of knowledge, the real insights from all sides of the conflict.
And the Battle of Bunker Hill seems perfect for this. Fought June 17, 1775,
Yeah.
During the Siege of Boston.
Absolutely. And here's the fascinating thing, the core paradox, really. It was technically a British win on the ground.
Right, they took the hill.
But it ended up being this huge boost for American confidence, and it had these massive consequences for the revolution moving forward.
Okay, so setting the scene,
Yeah.
Charlestown, Massachusetts, early days of the war. But you mentioned something straight away, a misconception.
Yes, the name itself, it's called the Battle of Bunker Hill, but most of the actual fighting, that happened on a different hill nearby, Breed's Hill.
Breed's Hill, not Bunker Hill. Okay, so why does that matter? What's the story there? Does it, tell us something about what the colonists were trying to do?
It definitely does. So the night before, June 16th, Colonel William Prescott takes about 1,200 colonial troops onto the Charlestown Peninsula.
Their mission.
Basically set up artillery positions. They wanted to be able to fire into Boston, hit the British forces there. But then you get this disagreement between Prescott, Israel Putnam, and the engineer, Captain Richard Gridley, about where exactly to fortify.
Ah, okay. So Bunker Hill was the original target, maybe?
Seems like it, or at least part of the plan. Some initial work was done there. But the main fortification, the square redoubt they built, that went up on Breed's Hill.
And Breed's Hill was closer to Boston, right?
Mm-hmm.
That sounds incredibly bold, maybe even reckless.
It was certainly provocative. Closer meant a better shot at Boston, and maybe they thought it was more defensible once built. But yeah, militarily it was riskier.
Riskier how?
It put them much closer to the British guns, and crucially, it made them more vulnerable to being surrounded, trapped on the peninsula. It seems it might have even gone against their original orders.
Wow. So it was a deliberate, aggressive move.
Definitely signaled they weren't just going to sit back.
Yeah.
And the work itself, building this thing overnight.
Yeah, tell me about the fortification. What did they actually build?
It was pretty substantial for an overnight job. A square redoubt, maybe 130 feet on a side. The walls were earth, about 6 feet high.
Dug by hand, all night.
Exactly. And they even built a wooden platform inside for the soldiers to stand on and fire over the wall. Just an incredible feat of labor and determination.
So dawn breaks, June 17th. The British must have gotten quite a surprise.
Oh, absolutely. They saw this new fort that basically hadn't existed the day before. General Clinton had actually been pushing Gage in how to attack Charlestown earlier, anticipating something like this.
And how did they first react?
Well, a sentry aboard HMS Lively spotted it first, around 4 a.m.
4 a.m., okay.
And the Lively just started firing. Seems it actually caused the colonists to stop working for a bit.
But wasn't there some confusion? I read the Admiral wasn't happy.
Right. Admiral Graves on HMS Somerset, he was apparently quite irritated that the Lively opened fire without orders and told them to stop.
But that didn't last long.
Nope. General Gage, the overall commander in Boston, overruled Graves. He ordered all the ships to fire something like 128 guns from the harbor.
Wow.
Plus, the batteries on Copp's Hill and Boston joined in, a massive bombardment.
Must have been terrifying for the men in the redoubt. Did it do much damage?
Surprisingly little, actually. The redoubt was high enough that the ships had trouble aiming accurately. And Copp's Hill was probably just too far away for its cannons to be really effective against the earthworks. It did kill one American soldier, though.
Just one. After all that.
Just one killed by the bombardment, yeah. But it also apparently damaged their water supply, which couldn't have helped morale.
So the colonists are under fire. The British are clearly preparing an attack. Prescott must have known he needed more men.
He absolutely did. He sent out urgent calls for reinforcements as soon as he saw the British getting ready to land troops.
And did help arrive. Who came?
Some key people showed up. Joseph Warren, for instance. He was a really popular leader in the Massachusetts Committee of Safety, a doctor.
Big name.
Huge. And Sic Pomeroy, an older militia general. What's amazing is both these guys had rank, but they chose to fight as ordinary soldiers, right there in the line.
That says a lot about the commitment, doesn't it?
It really does. Shows you the kind of spirit they had. Leaders fighting alongside their men.
And what about the defenses themselves? Did they expand beyond the main redoubt?
Yeah, they had to cover the flanks. Captain Knowlton and his Connecticut troops took the left side. They didn't have time for proper trenches, so they used what was there.
Like what?
A crude dirt wall, kind of a breastwork. They piled fence rails on top, stuffed it with hay. Very makeshift. They also dug some small V-shaped trenches nearby. Resourceful.
What you can do.
Absolutely. But then came a really crucial move. Colonels John Stark and James Reed arrived with about 200 New Hampshire men.
When was this?
This was after the British forces under General Howe had already started landing, so quite late in the game, but vital.
And what did they do?
They saw a gap. The defensive line didn't reach all the way to the Mystic River on the left flank.
Leaving them open to being outflanked.
Exactly. So Stark and Reed's men quickly extended the existing fence line down towards the water, even building a short stone wall at the very end, right by the river's edge. Closed the gap just in time.
That sounds like some quick thinking.
Yeah.
Stark seems like a key figure here.
He was. And this leads us right into that famous command, doesn't it? Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes.
The legend. Often attributed to Stark, or maybe Putnam.
Or Prescott, or Gridley.
Hmm.
The accounts vary. Stark did apparently place a stake in the ground maybe 100 feet out and told his New Hampshire men holding that fence line not to shoot until the British passed it.
So there's some truth to the idea of holding fire.
Oh, the idea is absolutely historically sound, but the specific quote, the whites of their eyes.
You think it's likely folklore?
Most modern scholars lean that way, yeah. It seems to be a phrase that had been around in military circles for a long time.
Like standard advice.
Pretty much. Goes back centuries, apparently. Gustavus Adolphus in Sweden, General Wolfe at Quebec in 1759. Variations of it pop up.
So less a unique command, more a reminder of good tactics.
Exactly. The core principle was crucial. Hold your fire. Wait until the enemy is close for maximum effect, especially when you're low on ammunition, which they definitely were.
Right. Make every shot count. Okay, so fast forward to about 3 p.m. The British are finally ready. Reinforcements have arrived.
Yep, the 47th Foot, the 1st Marines, they're gathered, ready to assault.
And this is when things get even more dramatic, with Charlestown itself.
Yes. General Pigot's wing of the assault, advancing near the village, started taking sniper fire from some houses.
Wow.
So Howe asked Admiral Graves for help dealing with that. Graves ordered his ships to fire heated shot or carcasses, basically incendiary shells, into Charlestown.
And set the town on fire.
The whole town went up in flames. Landing parties even went ashore to make sure it burned. Imagine the scene. This major battle unfolding, and right next to it, an entire town burning down.
A surreal backdrop, as some sources call it. Must have been horrifying to watch.
Absolutely. People like Abigail Adams and her young son, John Quincy, watched it all from miles away. The smoke was apparently huge, but the wind kept it mostly off the actual battlefield itself.
Okay, so the British advance begins, but it wasn't easy for them, was it? There were problems even before they got close.
Major problems. First, that incredible blunder with the cannons.
The wrong ammunition.
Yeah. Their field artillery, the light cannons they brought ashore, were supplied with cannonballs that were the wrong size. 12-pound balls for 6-pounder guns or something like that.
You're kidding. How does that even happen?
Astonishing, isn't it? A massive logistical failure. It delayed their attack significantly while they tried to sort it out. Terrible for morale right at the start.
And the terrain didn't help either.
Not at all. They were marching through fields with waist-high grass. They couldn't see the uneven ground underneath rocks, ditches.
Trip hazards everywhere.
Plus, all these stone and rail fences crisscrossing the landscape. It completely messed up their neat formations. They had to keep breaking ranks to climb over them.
And the heat.
Brutal afternoon sun. They were wearing thick wool uniforms, carrying heavy packs, probably around 60 pounds of gear, much of it unnecessary for this kind of assault.
60 pounds.
Yeah.
In that heat. With the town burning nearby.
Yeah, it must have been hellish even before the shooting started in earnest. Just debilitating conditions for the advance.
So despite all that, they pushed forward.
Hmm.
The first attacks, How did they go?
They were disastrous, for the British, that is. They launched 2 major frontal assaults against the redoubt and the rail fence.
And the colonists held?
Held and inflicted devastating casualties. Those disciplined volleys held until the last moment. The accounts describe it as withering fire, absolute slaughter.
Wow.
British officers were shocked. They saw lines of their men just mown down. They fell back in disorder, climbing back over heaps of their own dead and wounded. One account said they were as thick as sheep in a fold.
Grim picture. And Colonel Prescott in the redoubt, how is he holding up?
Remarkably well, by all accounts. He stayed cool, walking the ramparts, encouraging his men. Even as ammunition started running desperately low, he kept enforcing that fire discipline.
Still telling them to wait.
Yeah, apparently ordering them to hold fire until the British were maybe just 30 yards away. Maximum impact for every shot they had left. Takes nerves of steel.
Absolutely. But eventually, the British came again. The third assault.
That was the turning point. The Americans in the redoubt were almost completely out of ammunition by then. They could only offer, a few scattered shots.
Not enough to stop them this time.
No. And the British had adapted their tactics somewhat. They came on in deeper columns, not such wide lines.
Made them less vulnerable?
Maybe. Or just concentrated their force for the breakthrough. No. Crucially, many had dropped those heavy packs. And this time, it was primarily a bayonet charge.
The colonists didn't have many bayonets, did they?
Very few. So once the British surged over the walls of the redoubt, it became brutal hand-to-hand fighting. Swords, clubbed muskets. But the colonists couldn't hold them back without bayonets or ammo.
So they had to retreat.
They did. Pulled back over Bunker Hill itself this time, heading towards Cambridge and their main lines.
Was it an orderly retreat?
Reasonably so, under the circumstances. Especially the men along the rail fence, Stark's and Knowlton's troops. They provided crucial covering fire.
Preventing a total rout.
Exactly. They conducted a controlled withdrawal, fighting delaying actions, which stopped the British from completely encircling the men retreating from the redoubt. It saved a lot of lives, allowed many wounded to escape.
Still, a retreat under fire. Tough situation.
Very tough. And it's noted that most of the prisoners the British did take were already mortally wounded. Speaks to the ferocity of the fighting right to the end.
Let's talk about the cost, the casualties. You said it was a British victory, but the numbers tell a different story, don't they?
They really do. It drives home the term Pyrrhic victory. Overall casualties, both sides combined, were around 1,500.
And the breakdown.
The Americans lost about 450 killed, wounded, or captured. The British, over 1,000, 1,054 officially.
Wow, more than double the American losses.
Significantly more. And a huge number of those were officers, which was particularly shocking to the British military establishment. They lost leaders disproportionately.
An example?
Yeah, from just one corps, the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, I think they lost a major, 2 captains, and 3 lieutenants killed outright, plus many more wounded. It was a terrible blow to their officer corps.
And on the American side, any major figures lost?
The biggest loss, certainly in terms of morale and symbolism, was Dr. Joseph Warren.
The popular leader who chose to fight as an infantryman.
That's him. He was killed during the final stages of the retreat from the redoubt, a huge blow to the Patriot cause. Major Andrew McClary, one of Stark's officers from New Hampshire, was also killed later by cannon fire.
So heavy losses on both sides, but especially the British. Now there's another story, a specific legend from the battle, about Major Pitcairn being killed.
Ah, yes. Major John Pitcairn of the Royal Marines. He was widely disliked by the colonists, especially after Lexington and Concord.
Right, he was supposedly the one who ordered the first shots there.
Or at least was the officer in command. So the story goes that a black soldier, sometimes named Peter Salem, sometimes Salem Poor, shot and killed Pitcairn during the final assault on the redoubt. It's a powerful image of retribution.
Is it accurate? What did the record show?
Well, it's complicated. There were 2 prominent black soldiers named Salem, present Peter Salem, and Salem Poor. And there's even a petition signed by 14 officers praising Salem Poor's bravery at the battle, calling him an excellent soldier.
So Poor was definitely a hero there. But did he kill Pitcairn?
That's where it gets murky. A British Marine officer, Lieutenant John Waller, wrote an account just days later. He describes Pitcairn falling before the Marines actually climbed into the redoubt.
Oh.
Waller believed Pitcairn was hit by several shots almost simultaneously while rallying his men for the final push. So the timing doesn't quite match the popular story of him being shot inside the redoubt.
So the legend might be simplified. Or maybe just wrong.
It seems likely it got skewed or simplified, as historians say. maybe conflated events, or just evolved into a good story over time. The core element, a black soldier fighting bravely, is true. The specific kill might be legendary.
Understood. Beyond specific legends, though, the eyewitness accounts paint a truly brutal picture of the reality. You mentioned Lieutenant Waller.
Yes, his description of the scene inside the redoubt after the battle is chilling. He called it the horror of the scene, saying it was a sight too dreadful for me to dwell any longer on. Just carnage.
And he mentioned something about the musket balls.
Yeah, he repeated a rumor, or maybe a belief among the British troops, that the rebels had poisoned and chewed the musket balls in order to make them more fatal.
Ugh. Likely propaganda or fear, maybe?
Probably. Chewing a lead ball might deform it, make it cause a nastier wound like a dum-dum bullet. But poisoning seems unlikely and hard to prove. It shows the level of animosity, though.
And the impact wasn't just on soldiers. Abigail Adams's letters are incredibly powerful, aren't they?
Absolutely. Writing to John Adams, she talks about her bursting heart, hearing the cannons, learning about Warren's death, how he fell gloriously fighting for his country.
Just the constant stress.
She describes how the nonstop roar of the cannons made it impossible to eat, drink, or sleep for days. Yet she also notes the incredible resilience of the people.
What does she say?
She wrote that the loss of Charlestown affects them no more than a drop in the bucket, an amazing testament to their resolve, even amidst devastation.
Wow. But not everyone had that resilience.
Yeah.
There's a tragic story connected to the battle, isn't there?
Yes, a very sad one. Faith Trumbull Huntington, daughter of the Connecticut governor. She apparently watched the battle from a distance in Roxbury.
And the experience affected her deeply.
Profoundly. She fell into a severe depression afterwards and tragically later took her own life. It's such a stark reminder of the hidden costs of war, the trauma that extends far beyond the soldiers, hitting civilians and families.
A truly sobering story, which brings us back to the outcome. A British tactical win. They took the ground. But as you said, sobering for them too.
Incredibly sobering. General Clinton's quote really sums it up. Echoing Pyrrhus of Epirus after a costly battle, he reportedly said something like, "One more such victory and the cause is lost." Or, "A few more such victories would have shortly put an end to British dominion in America."
He saw the writing on the wall, even in victory.
He understood the cost was unsustainable, and for the Americans, it was actually a massive morale boost.
How so? They lost the hill, they retreated?
But they proved something crucial. They proved that these supposedly inexperienced militia could stand toe-to-toe with British regulars, fight bravely, and inflict terrible casualties from behind defenses.
That must have been huge for someone like George Washington just taking command.
Immense. It gave him and the whole Continental Congress hope. It showed the potential of the American soldier, even against a professional army.
And it changed the British approach.
Radically. Bunker Hill effectively discouraged the British from any further frontal attacks against well-defended front lines for much of the rest of the war. They became much more cautious, looking for ways to outflank or outmaneuver rather than charge head-on.
Which played into General Howe's character, perhaps.
Yeah.
You mentioned his hesitancy.
It certainly seemed to reinforce it. General Clinton actually urged Howe to push on immediately after the battle, follow the retreating Americans, maybe even attack Cambridge.
But Howe refused.
He did. He cited the heavy casualties his army had already suffered. He wasn't willing to risk another bloodbath.
And this became a pattern.
Colonial leaders definitely came to see Howe as, well, a tentative decision-maker. They point to the Battle of Long Island later, where he had another chance to potentially trap Washington's army, but again hesitated. Bunker Hill seems to have left a deep scar on his approach.
Interesting how one battle can have such a long shadow. Now, there was also a non-military aspect emerging around this time, psychological warfare.
Yeah, it's fascinating. There's this handbill apparently circulated among British troops later during the siege, titled Prospect Hill, Bunker's Hill.
What was it?
It was basically propaganda comparing the living conditions, satirically contrasting the supposedly good life of the American soldiers on Prospect Hill, fresh air, plenty of food, with the cramped, miserable conditions for the British cooped up in Boston.
What kinds of things did it mention for the British?
Things like being packed together, living on salty provisions, disease like smallpox spreading, basically painting a grim picture.
And the point was?
To encourage desertion. The handbills were supposedly even wrapped around bullets and fired into the British lines. A very direct message.
Did it work? Did propaganda like this actually have an effect?
It's hard to measure precisely, but desertion was a huge problem for the British throughout the war. Some historians argue they lost more men to desertion over the 8 years than they did to combat, so efforts like this likely contributed.
That's a startling statistic.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about how the battle is remembered. Monuments, legacy.
Well, the very first monument related to the battle was actually a memorial pillar for Dr. Warren, put up by the Freemasons, King Solomon's Lodge, back in 1794.
Before the big obelisk we see today.
Yes, long before. The famous granite Bunker Hill Monument wasn't completed until 1843. And it's interesting how people view it. Some see it as an invitation rather than a statement.
What does that mean?
It marks the place, obviously, but it doesn't necessarily dictate one single way to remember the battle. It invites contemplation, interpretation.
Which ties into that idea of historical memory, right?
Exactly. Historical memory isn't static. It's how groups of people interpret and reshape the past to understand themselves, to forge identity. Bunker Hill, the battle, and the monument have definitely been part of that process in America.
And it's still commemorated today.
Oh, yeah. June 17th, Bunker Hill Day, is still a legal holiday in Suffolk County, Massachusetts, which includes Boston and Charlestown. Its significance endures.
So wrapping up this deep dive, it's clear Bunker Hill is much more complex than just the famous quote or a simple win-loss tally.
Absolutely. It was a tactical victory for the British, technically, but the cost was enormous, and it fundamentally shifted their strategy. For the Americans, it was a loss of ground, but a massive psychological win.
It revealed the tenacity of the colonial forces, showed they could stand up to regulars.
And it highlighted that whole interplay between, tactical choices on the ground, sheer human courage, the terrible cost of war, and how these events echo through history and memory.
So thinking about everything we've dug into, the eyewitness accounts, the strategic blunders, the casualty lists, the legends versus the reality, what really stands out to you now, does looking at it this way change how you perceive this really pivotal moment?
It really makes you think, doesn't it? And maybe here's a final thought for you to mull over. Bunker Hill really hammered home that a quote-unquote victory can actually be more devastating for the winner than a defeat, especially if it reveals something fundamental about the war, like the enemy's unexpected resilience. How many other times in history have victories actually turned the tide against the victors just by proving how determined their opponents truly were?
You have been listening to Battle Cry. Join us again next time.